In this episode of the Let's Talk About Life podcast, we talk about home, mindfulness, and mastering the subtle art of not giving a
I'm Harrison.
And I'm Ameer, and we believe that one of life's most valuable assets is the gift of conversation.
In the midst of life, sometimes we forget the true power of a deep, meaningful conversation.
So take a breath, come join us,
and let's talk about life.
What does home represent to you?
Okay, I like that. What does home represent to you? I actually have, this is funny because I've been thinking about this recently. And because for me now, like for a while, consciously, I would call Toronto my home, right? Like I'm thinking about, now I subconsciously call it that. Like when I say I'm going home or whatever. And I used to be like here, which I'm currently in Saskatoon, which is my home. Like I'm in my family home right now. So we're in a different environment here if you're watching. And I think there's still there's home, like where you maybe grew up. Like for me, it's this is my family home. This is where I grew up for a long time. But now I feel like my home base is in Toronto because of the people that are around me. So what does home represent? I think it's something for me, I've realized, it's like that has to be developed. Like it's not like maybe an instantaneous thing, because there was for a while where Toronto felt maybe like, yeah, where I was like living and based, but I wouldn't really say it checked those boxes of calling it home necessarily. And I think maybe that comes from, like I said, the people around you, developing routines, getting to know, the environment. But I mean, people always go, the home is where the heart is and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think it really is like where certain people are. It's like, for me, it's where Maria is at this point. But then there's also my family. So there's those different areas. It was like, what feels most comfortable after traveling? We talked about last time, what feels like a place that I can come back to that's like you said, a home base, like a form of where you can kind of, relaxed, rest, and you feel comfortable and welcomed in that space. I think that's what it is for me. And this is a place where I am right now, and also back in Toronto. And I think you could maybe, create those spaces. But I think that's it. And it's kind of it's a weird thing because I don't exactly know the direct answer. I don't know if there is one, but that's what I've been thinking about. What is it for you? What does it mean? What does it mean to you? And you've just moved also, so.
Yeah, listeners, you remember you've been following along with this decision for the last 2-3 months. I know, right? It's been such a recurring thing. But as I've been kind of reflecting on the move and the situation more, I realized that home is the people.
Yeah,
it really is the people. Because if you have the place, if I picture my hometown, Vancouver, but you just take out all of the people, then it doesn't feel the same way. I'd say it's people. I'd say it's also memories as well. I think it's all the things that you mentioned. I think, that feeling of comfort and being able to create that space. Now, the interesting thing about home, the word home, the entire concept of it is it doesn't necessarily need to be confined to an address or to a single space.
Right. Yes.
I think home is where you feel comfortable, right? Home is your comfort zone in many ways, right? And while it's good to have a comfort zone, it's a space to fall back on. I think in many ways, though, as individuals who seek to grow, as individuals who seek to reach our full potential, in many ways, we need to leave that. We need to venture out into an uncomfortable space. And in doing so, this is a line from the video, but in doing so, we become at home in discomfort. Right.
You
we
create
become
a new
at home in uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that becomes familiar. That becomes comfortable. That's one thing I've been learning for myself. How can I feel comfortable, feel at home here? And going into another topic, this might be, no, I'll be completely real. I was talking about this with Annie last night. Not gonna lie, being in the US, I definitely feel like a foreigner here. That's for sure.
Interesting.
I wasn't expecting it to be that different what I'm used to, but I definitely do feel like a foreigner. Yeah. It is a completely different part of the world, of course. But also I feel uncomfortable and at many times unsafe, if I'm being honest. I think being in the US and moving to the US from the, I think last year was like the sixth best city to live in the world, Vancouver. There were three Canadian
Wow.
cities on the top 10 list. It was Calgary, Toronto, and Vancouver, right? But moving from Vancouver to the States here, I definitely, more than I'd like to admit, have felt quite unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Not gonna lie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's something that I've been just trying to grapple with, if I'm being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like when I first landed here in Philly, there was a mass shooting. Like, that happened the day after I
Yeah.
landed,
Mm-hmm.
and we drove past the area. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I was just like, "Whoa, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore." It was that kind of moment.
Yeah.
And since then, I've just been thinking about it. Like wherever I go, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
So
know.
how are you going about in that uncomfortability, right? Like
Mhm.
you can't really ignore that, especially when
Yeah.
you arrive and that kind of thing happens, right? It's around you, and it's a different environment. How are you personally going about making this feel like home? Those aspects of home that you miss, like you say, maybe it's not necessarily the city, it's the
Mhm.
people, but it's the environment that you've created.
Mhm.
How are you starting to go about that now that you've been there for a while?
That's a really good question. I would say it's entirely the people, like building
Mm,
relationships,
mm-hmm.
meeting new people, meeting up with friends, making new friends, I think is a huge, huge part of it, feeling connected. And I think also like finding a friend group outside of, Annie and I's relationship, I think is extraordinarily important just for having my own circle.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main thing I've been doing. But in terms of, but I feel like that's honestly all that I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like so much of the terrible stuff that happens it's just all entirely out of my control.
Right.
And I think there's nothing I can really do except be vigilant. And so my over planning mind, thinks about it every time I walk into a space. But also,
Right.
I think so be it. I have no control over these kinds of things, and it's just learn to live with it. I don't
Yeah.
know, man. It's challenging, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, it is like it's totally a tough thing. You're first of all, I mean, it takes a while to adjust to a new environment, right, and a new way of living. We get so caught up in routines, what we talked about before, right? So when you're like plucked from that, now you've got to create new comfortable routines and those kinds of things, right? Which I think is also a part of what I would call like home. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
when I again referencing my trip, I was doing things totally different. My routine was all out of whack. Everything was crazy, right? And then you come back and you're like, it takes you a little bit, like we talked about this little buffer, but once you get back into
Hmm.
it, it's like, okay, this is comfortable. And I think that is a big part for me of what quote
Mm.
unquote home means is that comfortability, like you're saying. Um and that can come from routines and just things that yeah, just things that you're used to. So now for you, like you said, like you're in a different environment and things are happening around you that are very different than what. So I guess it's maybe I'm sure you're trying to find bits of your let's say past life, in Vancouver to implement because those things are comfortable, and if you can start to do them in a new space, it makes that space comfortable. But then um, for me, I actually found that I stayed on my trip in like for like 4 days at a time in a place, and by the fourth day, I felt like I was kind of set up there, and I would say like this is kind of it feels like a home away from home, right?
Hmm.
And so I do think part of it is one time, two like routines and that kind of thing, and then just like being comfortable, learning about your environment to become comfortable. But it's tough. Yeah, it's a tough
Hmm.
thing. It's interesting to think about.
Totally. Yeah, and you bring up a very interesting part of it that I didn't think about, routines. And I
Mm,
think like as I reflect on this more, and I will do this, more this week. I feel like our conversations every week are just so useful for me. Just like it gives me so much to
mm,
reflect on and
mm,
implement that week. But I think routine and specifically mindfulness is extraordinarily important. Learning to
mm-hmm,
find a home within,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Finding a safe,
Yes.
comfortable, well, not necessarily comfortable, but a safe, mindful space within, I think, is how you can find home wherever you are.
Mm,
And I think just as much as we create a home outside of ourselves, I think it's also even more important to create a home within ourselves, a safe
Mm-hmm.
space that we can just be, where we can be present, where we can just be fully here, right? No
Yeah,
matter what stresses might be happening, either in the outside world or even inside our mind, a refuge, a space for ourselves,
for
I think
sure.
is important, is especially important to create. And I'm going to do more of that this week, just being mindful
Yeah.
wherever I go, you know?
It
Yeah, that's a
just, I
good.
mean, it comes back to that quote that you've said many times. I think it's the name of a book, right? Wherever you go, there
Yes.
you are. And I've
Yeah.
thought about, not to just like dwell on the same things, but
Hmm.
I've been thinking about that a lot since you first mentioned it.
Hmm.
Specifically, now that I've been moving a little bit, traveling around, and not even just that, just like an interesting, I'll tell you after, an interesting experience that happened a couple days ago,
Mm.
anxiety inducing, and
Mm.
and I was like, in this moment, I can rely on my environment to bring my anxiety down. So I could be like, when I get to point, B, I will feel better. But I was like, I'm right here right now. Like I can control how I feel. You know what I mean? And I've really been trying to think about that a lot. And yes, you can be impacted by, and we're very much impacted by our environments. I'm not trying to negate that at all.
Mhm.
However, I think that how you react to yourself, like how you can control yourself regardless of the
Mhm.
environment you're in, right? Your mind. And I've been thinking about that more, I found it really really helpful. So in this context, making home feel like just you when you like go within, which means that you can be wherever you can, you know yeah, you can literally be wherever physically and try to at least have a sense of that. It doesn't mean that it has to be the only sense of like home, but
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I like that. I
Mhm.
like that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's at the heart of what we talk about a lot. Did you want to talk about that one story
Well, we
that you said
can
you want to
actually.
share?
It's an interesting thing. So it's not like I'm not trying to hide anything. I was like, I don't know, it's a
Mhm.
little off
Yeah,
topic. So
totally.
I
Yeah.
I have a severe. I mean, we both have allergies, right?
Gotcha.
Amir's allergic to. Funny story. Amir is allergic to almonds, and I didn't know. So when he came over on his layover in Toronto, and I was like, and we made you breakfast, and it's like I made almond flour pancakes, and I had no idea. I was like, oh, I
Mhm.
thought it was. And he was like, "You're serious?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "No, like I'm allergic to almonds." I had no idea. So anyway,
I'm sorry. I,
but
I I didn't say anything.
it's so funny. Anyway, we're both allergic to things. So I have a severe wheat
Mhm.
allergy. It's supposedly anaphylactic, and we
Oh,
were
I
out
see.
at a cabin with some friends over the weekend, and we were having marshmallows. I didn't think anything of it, and turns out
Mhm.
the marshmallows had wheat in them, like wheat starch.
Oh,
And I've never
I see.
directly consumed something with wheat in it, so it gets very unpredictable for people that don't have allergies. Just so you know, so it's like I don't like I'm very high on the scale. Basically, the top you can be, but that means I could like have my stomach could just be bothered when I have it, or I could go into anaphylactic shock, and not
Mhm.
be able to breathe. So we're about like an hour and a half outside the city, like with like nothing around, right? And I was like in that moment, I was like, I think I want to go back to the city just so we're close to the facilities. I don't know what'll happen, but to be
Mhm.
precautionary. And in the past, I've had some pretty severe anxiety. I didn't really call it that or acknowledge it, for many, many years. I didn't really know. But now that I reflect on it, it's like I was pretty anxious about my allergies for a
Mhm.
long time because it's such scary thing, when you're younger. And I mean, just in general, because it's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Death could be involved. It's a scary
Yeah,
thing. So,
totally.
so I've always had really high anxiety. So sometimes even just like thinking about the fact that I'm eating something maybe that I haven't prepared, I'm not sure what's in it. And I could, your brain is very powerful. Your mind's very powerful. So if you start to think about it, I could like make, oh my God, is my throat feeling this way? And like it starts to feel a certain way.
Really?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know. It is actually a common thing,
totally.
right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I read the package. I was like, oh, I have consumed something with weed in it. This is a fact.
Mhm.
So initially, obviously, I was like, oh, like crap, and I started to kind of get worked up, and I was like shaking a little bit, like just my body,
Mhm.
nervous system's acting up. So we got in the car and we're driving home, and I'm starting to feel this way, and I was like, okay, I'm okay in this very moment. I've taken something. I'm going to like meditate for like 5-10 minutes here and just try to like get control of my brain and not give into it. And I've also learned a lot about like how your body, and it
Mhm.
reacts to your mind and all these kinds. So I was like, I don't need
Mhm.
to be I don't need to be sitting here focusing on what could happen or what. I was like, what is happening right now? I can breathe fine. You know what I mean? We're going towards somewhere safer. And I just calm myself down. And the act of doing that was like, it was night and day. I could have spent that whole hour and a half freaking out and like wondering if the feelings that I'm feeling are me or is it my brain making them feel that way. And instead, I was like, I managed to calm myself down. We kind of changed the topic, what we were talking about, and I tried to ignore it. And I felt pretty normal. I ended up being okay. I was completely fine. So luckily, that was good. And the Benadryl I took kicked in, and I think, brought down anything I was having. But my point is from this story is that like your mind is very powerful, but you have to choose what you're doing with it, because I could have in that moment, like nobody around me could have controlled how I reacted to the situation, right? I had to choose to react to the situation a certain way. And if you want to tie that into what we're talking about, is like I said, like you can control, wherever you are, your mind and what's going on in that. But that was my little tangent.
Totally. So that is so relatable, dude. Ugh, my entire life I've dealt with the same things, and it's exactly what you say. I'm starting to eat something a little spicy, but then I feel a little tingle in my throat. I'm like, am I dying? Oh god. Then I spiral into thinking about that. And then sometimes I'll just have to consciously will myself like, I'm fine. Instead of focusing on what could happen, said what is happening. But then also at the same time, tying this into what I was talking about earlier, just concerning like just safety and everything over here, like in a foreign place, I think there's also a balance of like do everything that you can to prepare. Like be proactive. Like the first of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Classic. But habit number 1, be proactive. And I think prepare as much as you can, but then also like once you prepared and like you have a plan or as much as you can do in place, let go of the rest. And I'm saying that right now, but Lord knows I need to practice that way better. Lord knows. Oh gosh. But yeah, I think that's the beauty of these conversations. We're able to figure it out, grow together.
And it's like, I mean, take you for example, you did plan this move a lot, and even what is to come in the fall, you've planned a lot of that, but now you're realizing, it seems, that you do need to let go of some of those things because you can't control every aspect of it. And I mean, I just think that's the nature of a new experience. It's like we all do that. We all plan. You could like plan out a hard conversation and you get there and then you realize, well, it's not going to go the way I planned, right? And you got to kind of let go. But I do think there is some validity to planning things still, but you have to be equally as willing to let the moment, take you and change, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. As I was reflecting on kind of this move and everything a little bit more, I'm not sure if I mentioned this last week, but I'll say it again because it was a good point. And if you haven't listened to last week, you can go check out last week's episode, Let's Talk About Life podcast on Spotify, wherever you get the internet. It's always a plug. But I mentioned last time that it was only once I had fully let the situation go and fully let like the entire like Berkeley school situation, like once I had let that dream go and like detached myself from the outcome, like fully let go, that's when it came back to me. Right? It was only once I was like, I can live without this. I can be fine without this. Then it's like, hey, okay, now I will come back to you better. And I've just been thinking about that as like what else is that analogous to in life? What else am I holding on to that I desperately want, but would actually, could possibly just actually come to me if I were to just let it go? I think so often that applies a lot to happiness, or, at least to my conceptualization of like joy and peace. So often we think, okay, I'm holding on to this idea of what I want it to be. I'm holding on to, this is what happiness should look like. I want this. I want to be happy. I want to be peaceful. I want to be joyful, all these things. But in many ways, letting go of that, and in many ways, like letting go of our control over that. Actually, let me think of a better way to word this. Oftentimes we think, okay, I need these conditions to be met in order to be happy, joyful, peaceful, all these things. I need to know exactly what's going to happen. I need to all these conditions need to be met. I need to be in this certain place. But in reality, the holding on to those conditions is what's actually preventing us from getting to happiness,
getting to them,
to joy, to peace, right? And in many ways, letting go of the need for happiness in a way. The need for happiness can be a roadblock to actually finding it. I don't know how we got here. We were talking about home, but
no, it's so
gonna...
good. And it's funny because you said about letting go. I saw somebody recently talking about this in regards to, I think they were the YouTube channel or something. It doesn't really matter what it was. But like they said they were trying so hard to like force things a certain way, you know, to make it work, to make it quote unquote successful or whatever, right? And he said once I stopped, like I kind of almost not gave up, but I was kind of like, you know, this is clearly not working. Like I'm not going to put all my energy into forcing this. I'm just going to make stuff whatever, like almost caring less. And he goes, that's when it blew up.
Right? I
Right?
completely agree. Completely agree. It's always the projects. It's always the videos that I thought the least of that always did the best. And I feel like the same is going to be for us in this podcast. You know, the less we care about, in many ways, like the less we care about the performance of something, the better we tend to do at it because we're doing it for its own sake instead of for the results.
Yeah, I mean that's it, it's not just like making YouTube videos or it's like anything. It's really anything. Is the less you, it's not like saying you care less sounds terrible, but it really is. It's like, you know, if you're through doing that, like you said, you're not focusing on the results. You're not focusing on you're just focusing on the innate like nature of whatever the activity is that you're doing, right? You're focusing on how to do that for the sake of doing it, not for to get something. You said the result, to get something out of it, or outside I don't know, outside pressures or anything like that, right? And that's yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting. I think that's something that like you just kind of stumble upon though. Like I feel like it's really hard to implement. I feel like it's really challenging. Like it's like you reflect on it later and go, oh, this is what happened. You know what I mean? I don't know
Totally.
if you feel that way, but
Totally. Oh, of course. Like so much is learned in hindsight. Exactly what we're talking about, by the way. I was grabbing something while you were talking. Literally the entirety of what we're talking about right now is the crux of this orange book.
Nice.
You've probably seen this around, viewers. You've probably seen this, and listeners. This is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a
Bleep.
Usually I swear so much off camera, being honest. But we don't want that E on our podcast. Okay, so yeah, this is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson, the counterintuitive approach to living a good life. And what we're talking about right here, like not caring in a way, is the crux of this book. And it mentions...
I bet he's got a quote for us, people.
Oh, totally.
Bet he's got a quote.
Ameer always has a quote. Here it is. Perfect. Here it is. So, he talks about what's called the backwards law, and it's in the first chapter of our lives the book. Sorry, I was reading the book at the same time as I was talking. I was like, our lives. Okay. So, I'm gonna read out a section here, and I will try to censor myself when I can. Okay. The desire for more positive experience is in and of itself a negative experience. And paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is itself a positive experience. This is a total mind F. So I'll give you a minute to unpretzel your brain and maybe read that again. Wanting positive experience is a negative experience. Accepting negative experience is a positive experience. It's what the philosopher Alan Watts used to refer to as the backwards law. The idea that the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, as pursuing something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. The more you desperately want to be rich, the more poor and unworthy you feel, regardless of how much money you actually make. The more you desperately want to be sexy and desired, the uglier you come to see yourself, regardless of your actual appearance. The more you desperately want to be happy and loved, the lonelier and more afraid you become, regardless of those who surround you. The more you want to be spiritually enlightened, the more self-centered and shallow you become in trying to get there.
Yeah, I got to read that book. I remember that book. That just sounds awesome.
It's so good. It's so good.
Wow.
But yeah, like what we're talking about, the backwards law.
Exactly. Interesting. So it's almost like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a closing point, you know, I think it's important whether, you know, it comes to creating a safe space of our own at home, or in our travels, or wherever we go, or whatever comes into our future, I think it's important to let go, and as the book says, to master the subtle art of not giving a F.
Yeah, as you lower your I think we talked about expectations at one point.
Yeah, last week.
The less expectation you put on things like that, and you just do whatever, and you go into it with an open mind. And same thing with this, is like if you're trying to find maybe what home is, or as you're exploring that, it's like not trying to force it to be something.
Yes.
Like right now, I said, like for me, it feels like it's a couple different places. Maybe it's a couple of different people. None of those are incorrect. There's not like there's a one way, and like you don't need to put an expectation. You need to feel a certain way. You just need to. It's just like classic mindfulness. Acknowledge how what is actually there, not what you want to be there, or yeah, it's interesting.
Totally. That's awesome, dude. Wow, thank you.
Dang. Well, thanks everybody. We're gonna do a little shorter episode today because we thought maybe we'll try something out. We'll shoot a little shorter bit of still good information, but in a shorter amount of time.
Exactly. So let us know what you think about this format. If you want to see shorter episodes, or if you like longer ones, leave.
Like, no, I want 7 hours of Ameer giving me quotes.
7-hour LTAL compilation.
Oh, man, that's awesome. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will catch you next time.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Visit us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Talk About Life Pod. And for more information, head on over to harrisonkingofficial.com/podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and have a deep, meaningful conversation in your own life.